Do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law. Frater Oz again. Wanted to make kind of a different video today on the topic of Wicca. Okay, and we might touch a little bit on some other more modern forms of magic or traditions. Okay. Now, years and years ago, I made a 2 or 3 part series on this topic. So if you want to, you can go back and watch a younger me talk about this stuff. There were some minor inaccuracies in there and stuff. You know, that's just what it is when I go back and watch my videos, okay? But I wanted to talk about Wicca in the sense that how it relates to Thelema, because I think that even today, a lot of people don't really realize that the connections that exist, at least not the extent to which they exist, okay? So, there was a time, okay, when Wicca got real popular back in the late 80s and 90s, okay, that there were a lot of people running around calling it the old ways and the old religion and pretending as if it was some kind of an ancient system of magic, okay? And that's simply not the case, all right? Now, I will give you that some of the things that are incorporated into that system, such as holidays and some of the practices surrounding that and herbalism and stuff like that, that are really old, you know what I mean? But when it comes to the magic, the witchcraft, if you will, it's very modern, okay? It was created in the late 40s, early 50s by Gerald Gardner. Now, I don't see as many people today running around touting it as if it is some ancient thing, but I do often see people that talking about, oh, I'm generational and 4th generation or and shit like that, okay? But Wicca was created in the late 40s, so, you know, maybe you got 1 generation, you know what I mean? Maybe 2, but the fact is that Gerald Gardner, like, basically took elements of ceremonial magic, elements of Thelema, and elements of old religious practices such as holidays and practices surrounding that, herbalism and stuff like that, and he blended all of these ideas together and created Wicca. So Wicca is a modern creation, okay? Now there is a rumor that he had been involved in some type of a witch's coven prior to that, but there's no actual records of that. There's a fiction book that talks about it, okay? But like when we talk about Wicca, we're talking about a modern creation, okay? There are no books of shadows or groups of ritual tools or ancient magical manuscripts that exist in regards to witchcraft prior to 1948 or whenever exactly it was that he created it. It was, I don't know the exact date, but it was somewhere between, it was right after Crowley died, okay? Now, something that a lot of people who are involved in Wicca don't really realize is that Gerald Gardner was an OTO initiate, okay? He wasn't, it's not, back then it wasn't like it is now, okay? Back then, Crowley would just like, poof, you're a 3rd degree or whatever, you know what I mean? Poof, you're a 9th degree. You know, it wasn't as structured as it is today. But in the late years of Crowley's life, Gerald Gardner went and visited with Crowley, and at some point, whether it had been before that or during that experience, he initiated Gardner to the 4th degree. And some people say to the 7th degree, okay? But at least to the 4th degree. I mean, the charter and the documents exist today, and you can go online and find them, okay? And so Crowley basically gave Gardner a charter to create a camp of Minervals, or a body of Minervals. I don't remember the exact quote. It's been a while since I looked at it. And so when we think about what Gardner then almost immediately went off and created, he created Wicca, okay? Crowley had discussed similar things with Frater Akkad, talking about how he thought that there should be an earth-based religion that was created to basically guide people toward Thelema, you know what I mean? And if you look at the Wiccan system, like the Alexandrian and Gardnerian systems, okay, like Alexandrian is, I kept saying Gardnerian in the videos I made years ago, but the book that I started with and was reading from was actually Alexandrian witchcraft. And the guy who created that also had connection to Crowley. So when you look through these original documents and the early documents, like, they steal directly from the Gnostic Mass and other Thelemic concepts and Thelemic writings. Like, direct quotes from the Gnostic Mass exist all through that book that I started with, which was A Witch's Bible Complete. Okay, and in that other video, I went through specific examples that I just thumbed through really quickly and found in the book. And it wasn't until years later, after I had been doing Wicca, that I realized those connections, okay? But nonetheless, like, a lot of that stuff was cribbed and taken directly from Crowley's works. And the fact that Gardner had connection to Crowley and to the OTO and was an initiate and had been given a charter to create a camp of Minervals right before he created Wicca. And the fact that Alex Sanders, I believe his name is, who started Alexandrian witchcraft, also had a childhood connection to Crowley. The fact that Crowley had spoken in the past to others about creating an earth-based religion has always made me think that in those meetings that Gardner and Crowley had in the last days of Crowley's life, or the last year or so of Crowley's life, Crowley probably talked about this subject to him as well. And if he didn't directly tell him he should do this, he at least probably put the idea in Gardner's head, okay? And then at a certain point, I believe it was Dion Fortune who basically de-Crowleyfied the Gardnerian form of witchcraft. But in the Alexandrian form, when you look at through a book like The Witch's Bible Complete, or A Witch's Bible Complete, like, you find all of these direct quotes and direct symbolic references to Thelemic ideas. And so there are deeply rooted connections in the Wiccan system to Thelema, as well as there being connections that were also thrown in, you know, stuff about the holidays and ancient mythologies and stuff that people did follow, that were thrown all together and melded all together in order to give it this feeling of an ancient system, when in reality it's a modern system. Now, I don't have anything against Wicca, okay? Like, I started in Wicca, a lot of people start in Wicca, a lot of Thelemites still involve themselves in Wicca, you know, and there's nothing wrong with that, okay? But I do think that it's important that it's well known that, at least in a large part, it was a product of Gardner's meetings with Crowley and Gardner's exposure to Western magic, ceremonial magic, and Thelema. Because when we look at the magical systems, like casting the circle, you know, just a lot of it, you know, and the way it's done links directly to ceremonial magic. And we do have surviving manuscripts and all that stuff from what we could consider to be ancient times as far as those forms of magic are concerned. And so anyone who thinks that Wicca is actually this ancient thing, or, you know, modern witchcraft is this ancient thing, like, ask yourself, then how is it that all of these manuscripts from things like the Golden Dawn, Eliphas Levi, all this stuff still exist and survived, and yet nothing of witchcraft, of the ancient forms of witchcraft, survived? Like, not a single book of shadows, not a single document saying how to cast a circle or any of that kind of stuff survived? Like, it just doesn't jive, you know, from a scientific point of view, a historical point of view. Now, the references that we do have to witchcraft from ancient times come from the Christian church and the Salem witch trials and all that stuff. And that was basically, those people weren't witches. Those were people that the church wanted to persecute. And so they made the pretense of Satanism and witchcraft and whatever. And speaking of Satanism, the same is true of modern forms of Satanism. You know, Levian, whatever form you want to look at, those were all created later and more modern. At least any that I'm aware of are more modern. And you're not going to find documents and books and references to those systems pre-Crowley. As far as I know, you're not going to find that, okay? And so that's a lot of why I say Thelema is the original Satanism, but prior to Crowley, you know, magic was primarily Christian based. I mean, it was based in the Yod-He-Vav-He and, you know, Solomonic magic and Enochian magic, and all this stuff were done by people who were Abrahamic, believed in Abrahamic faiths. You know, you had King Solomon with the Goetia and all that stuff was Jewish, you know, and then you had John Dee, who created Enochian magic, was Christian, you know, and so you have all of these Abrahamic faiths that had these forms of magic that, you know, and even Golden Dawn relies heavily on Judeo-Christian imagery and iconography. You know, all this stuff relies on that particular ethos, you know, and it wasn't until Crowley that we got this shift toward the new eon, the Aeon of Horus, and all of this, and this shift away from that Judeo-Christian ideology toward, I mean, like it or not, Satanism, satanic, something that denies Christ and denies, you know, doesn't really deny, but claims to have surpassed those Abrahamic viewpoints. Okay, and so when we look at modern Wicca, modern Satanism, all of these forms of magic, in some way, almost all of them connect to Crowley and to Thelema. And so I think sometimes that's why Thelema gets a bad rap with these other communities, because they don't want to admit that Crowley was basically the beginning of all that stuff. You know what I mean? Like, but it's undeniable to someone who's been doing it for a long time and sees all the similarities and stuff. It's undeniable. And sure, Wicca branched off after that and became all of this, you know, fairy Wicca, Celtic Wicca, and, you know, Miley Cyrus football Wicca. You know, many different like types of Wicca evolved after that, but in its original form, it was heavily based on Crowley and Thelema and ceremonial magic, even though that fact was somewhat veiled, and you had to be familiar with Crowley's material already to see those connections. But the connections are certainly there. And if you want to see examples and stuff, you can go back and watch that video series I did years ago and watch a me that still had teeth talk about this stuff. But I just wanted to throw that out there. I also want to talk a little bit about the differences between the systems and why I am not really keen on Wicca anymore. Like, I don't have a problem with it, but, you know, we talked about the Kabbalah and the Tree of Life in that video, okay? And when we talked about it, we talked about how Malkuth is the earth. It represents manifestation, things that you can see and touch and feel, okay? And how Yesod represents the astral plane, or, you know, maybe the subconscious or dreams. And then beyond that, going along the middle pillar, you come to Tifereth, which is what Thelemites consider the holy guardian angel, okay? And the goal of Thelema is to progress to a point where you reach the sphere of Tifereth and gain knowledge and conversation of that holy guardian angel, and then to eventually proceed through the abyss into the supernals, and to gain spiritual attainment, to gain knowledge of the universe and of oneself beyond what we would know now, Okay, well, Wicca doesn't really contain that at all. Okay, Wicca to me is just sits in Malkuth and goes up to Yesod some, and it does. There is no system inside of Wicca that pushes an individual to or toward that spiritual attainment. It's more of just like worshiping and trying to affect things on this plane in Malkuth. So Malkuth relates to the Minerval initiation, and Crowley gave Gardner a charter to start a camp of Minervals, or a body of Minervals. So basically, in a sense, that's exactly what he did. He created this religion this system that basically rests in Malkuth and goes up some into Yesod, but it doesn't contain any of the things that push one toward spiritual attainment, or toward really even like balancing themselves and all of these things that I've talked about that Thelema does. It teaches us to pursue our true will, to live our true nature, to discover our true nature, to balance ourselves, to try to climb up the tree toward attainment. And Wicca does not really contain this. And also another difference is, a way that I've described it over the years is that Wicca is more like groveling before these divine forces, begging them to do things for you. And this is very Malkuth and Yesod. We're in this sphere of Malkuth on the earth in manifestation, and Wiccan ritual tends to ask and beg and reach out to these upper forces to do things or on this plane. Okay, whereas Thelemites and other ceremonial magicians in general tend to command and control. And there's a big difference between groveling before the divine and becoming one with the divine, and either looking at them on the same level as you or even commanding them. There's a big difference, and I think that a lot of people who are involved in Wicca don't really realize the extent to which this kind of places them down in these lower spheres, because a lot of them don't really have an understanding of other systems that allows them to see these differences. And I'm not going to say it's harmful or that it's bad, because the fact is that some people are not really designed to be ceremonial magicians or be Thelemites. Like, I don't want to talk bad, but some people are not really smart enough, or they're not emotionally balanced enough, or they're not psychologically balanced enough to handle some of the things that Thelemites and ceremonial magicians do, And it's okay for them to have something to where they just kind of hang out in the Minerval. You know what I mean? There's nothing wrong with that. But it's important to know that that's the case, and so that those who do want to branch out further know that there's a place for them outside of those, worshiping type religions or systems. So I guess that's all I got. I just wanted to kind of go through that, and hopefully that's helpful for you. Hopefully you learned something from it, and I know a lot of you, this is really basic stuff, but that's what I'm about, doing basic stuff. So hope you enjoyed it. Hit that subscribe button, like the video, sign up for the Patreon, or buy a t-shirt or something, and try to catch a live stream. Love is the law. Love under will.